All right, let's kick things off today and dive deep into a topic that I think is super interesting. We're talking about ammunition.
A tiny but mighty topic.
Exactly. And to really get into the details, we've got these two Canadian firearms safety handbooks that lay it all out. Whether you're already into shooting sports or just kind of curious about how this all works, this is going to be good stuff.
I think we're going to bust some myths today.
For sure. Just getting ready for this deep dive, I learned a few things that surprised me, and I bet you will too.
All right, let's get into it. Where do we even begin with ammo?
Well, both handbooks jump right into this thing called rifling.
Ah, the spiral grooves inside the barrel.
Yeah, I never really thought about it before, but they explain how those grooves actually make the bullet spin.
Like throwing a spiral in football.
Exactly. Makes
Right.
sense, right? A spinning bullet's got to be way more stable and accurate.
It's all about aerodynamics. That spin helps the bullet cut through the air smoothly and fly straight and true.
Now, here's where things get a little bit tricky. Both handbooks use both imperial and metric measurements when they talk about caliber. But get this, they actually measure it slightly differently depending on which system they're using.
It's kind of funny, actually. In the Imperial system, they measure caliber from land to land, meaning the raised parts between the grooves. But in metric, they measure from groove to groove.
So it's not exactly a direct conversion, which is something to keep in mind. And that's probably why both these handbooks really, really emphasize checking the data stamp on your firearm.
Right, you got to make absolutely sure you're using the right ammo.
They list out all these potential dangers of using the wrong stuff. Yikes.
Yeah, we're not talking just jamming or misfires here. You could be talking about serious damage to the firearm or even like an explosion. Scary stuff.
Definitely not worth messing around with. All right, so we've talked rifling and caliber, but let's get into the cartridges themselves. The handbooks break down two main types, rimfire and centerfire.
And they actually do a really good job of explaining it with those clear diagrams.
Yeah, those visuals are super helpful. It all comes down to where that little primer is located and how it gets ignited.
You know, that primer sets off the whole chain reaction that makes the bullet fire.
Yeah.
So yeah, its location is pretty darn important.
And speaking of primers, get this, both handbooks say that dry firing a rimfire firearm can actually damage it.
Oh yeah, that's an important point. A lot of folks don't realize that.
I didn't. So what's the deal with that? Why is it bad for rimfire guns?
Well, think about how rimfire cartridges work. The firing pin strikes the rim directly, right?
Right.
So if there's no cartridge there to absorb the impact, that firing pin can actually deform the rim.
Oh, I see.
And then later on, when you do try to fire a real cartridge, it might not go off properly because the rim is all messed up.
So basically just don't rimfire guns.
Got it.
Another thing both handbooks talk about is the popularity of the .22 caliber rimfire cartridge. It's like the go-to for a lot of shooters, right?
Yeah, definitely a classic. Great for target practice and plinking.
But they make sure to point out the difference between .22 long rifle and .22 magnum.
Oh, yeah, big difference.
Again, it all comes back to using the right ammo for the right gun. All right, now let's break down the actual parts of a cartridge. It's like a little mini explosive package, right?
It is. And both handbooks do a great job of explaining each component.
So we've got the bullet, the powder charge, the case, and the primer.
Each one is essential. You can't have one without the others.
The handbooks even talk about the different types of bullets, like jacketed soft points and full metal jackets.
Yeah, there's a whole world of bullet designs out there, each with its own purpose.
It's pretty amazing. But something they really stress is the potential danger of messing with those components, especially if you're thinking about reloading your own ammo.
It's not something to take lightly.
Right. If the ammo isn't loaded perfectly, you could have malfunctions, jams, or even worse, an explosion.
That's why if you're going to reload, you absolutely have to follow all those safety guidelines to a T.
Absolutely. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about shotguns. They've got their own unique characteristics that are laid out pretty clearly in these handbooks.
One thing that always trips people up is shotgun gauge. It's not measured in calibers like rifles and handguns.
Yeah, it's a whole different system. It's based on how many lead balls of that bore size would add up to a pound.
It's kind of weird when you think about it, but that's how they do it.
So a 12-gauge shotgun means 12 lead balls of that bore size would weigh 1 pound.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Kind of. And then there's the .4 Soeo gauge, which actually is measured in caliber.
Like the oddball of the shotgun world.
Both handbooks do a good job explaining shotgun chokes. They even compare them to a garden hose nozzle.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. You adjust the choke to control how tight the shot pattern is. just like you adjust a nozzle to control the water spray.
And you've got different choke types like full, modified, improved cylinder, and cylinder bore.
Each one creates a slightly different shot pattern, and you choose the choke that's best for the type of shooting you're doing.
One thing that surprised me was learning that steel shot can actually damage some shotgun barrels.
Oh yeah, that's true. Steel is much harder than lead, and some older barrels just weren't built to handle it.
So it's super important to check the manufacturer's guidelines before using steel shot.
Absolutely. Always play it safe.
All right, I'm going to switch gears again because we need to dive into the world of ballistics and trajectory. These are concepts that both handbooks really hit hard.
Absolutely crucial for anyone who handles firearms.
Ballistics is basically the science of how projectiles move through the air.
It's all about understanding how gravity and air resistance affect the bullet's path.
Right, and both handbooks have some really great illustrations that show how a bullet actually travels in a curved path.
It's not just a straight line, like in the movies.
Not at all. It's all about the forces acting upon it.
Right, and you have to factor all that in when you're aiming and shooting.
Speaking of which, those handbooks provide some pretty crazy numbers on how far bullets and shot can actually travel. It really makes you think about being aware of your surroundings and what's beyond your target.
You are responsible for every shot you fire.
100%. You know, another important topic both handbooks cover is potential hazards. Things like misfires, hang fires, and squib loads. These are the situations that we need to know how to handle safely.
It's all about being prepared for the unexpected. You can't assume that every shot is going to go off perfectly.
Right. And there's this one warning in both handbooks that really stuck with me. Never, ever load a smaller gauge shell into a larger gauge shotgun.
Oh yeah, that's a recipe for disaster.
They actually say it can lead to a barrel burst, which sounds terrifying.
Basically like a mini explosion inside the gun.
Yikes. So double checking your ammo before you load is super important.
Absolutely essential. Always make sure you're using the right stuff for your firearm. No exceptions.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground, but before we move on, I want to touch on ammo storage and the legal requirements here in Canada. Both handbooks talk about how important it is to keep ammo safe and secure, especially away from kids.
Common sense stuff, but it's worth repeating.
Definitely. They also lay out the specific rules for storing restricted firearms and ammunition.
Everything has to be locked up tight and separate.
And both handbooks really stress storing ammo in a cool, dry place, ideally in a vented container.
Moisture is your ammo's worst enemy.
And they even make this funny comparison to storing fine wine.
They say that moisture can ruin your ammo just like it can ruin a vintage bottle of wine.
It's a good analogy. And speaking of ruining things, they also point out that storing ammo in a non-vented container can be super dangerous if there's a fire. If that ammo gets too hot, it could explode.
Not a good situation.
So proper storage is about more than just keeping things organized. It's about safety, too. All right, that's it for part 1 of our ammo deep dive. We'll be right back to explore even more.
Okay, so before we took that little break, we were getting into some of the what-if scenarios that these handbooks talk about. You know, like what happens if you get a misfire?
Yeah, it's all about knowing what to do when things don't go exactly as planned.
Safety first, right? So let's say you pull the trigger and nothing happens. Total silence. What's the first thing you do?
Well, the handbooks are really clear about this. Don't touch the gun. Don't try to eject the cartridge or anything like that.
Just wait.
Exactly. Both handbooks say you got to wait a full 60 seconds, a whole minute. And during that time, you keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction, just in case.
So there's a chance it could still go off.
Yep. Sometimes there can be a delay in the primer igniting. It's rare, but it can happen.
So it's like waiting for a really slow fuse to burn out, basically. And if it still doesn't fire after that minute, you can carefully open the action and eject the cartridge. But even then, you want to be super careful and make sure the chamber and barrel are clear.
Wow. I guess patience is key when it comes to firearms.
Absolutely. You know, that whole waiting thing applies to hang fires too, those delayed ignitions we talked about earlier.
I remember those. Those sounded kind of scary.
They can be, but if you know what to do, you'll be fine. With a hang fire, you basically treat it like a misfire. Wait that full minute, keep the muzzle pointed in a safe direction, and then carefully check things out.
So even though the bang hasn't happened yet, you still got to be super cautious.
Right. You never know when that round's going to go off.
And then there's the squib load. That one always sounds kind of mysterious to me.
Squib loads are tricky because they can be hard to detect right away. Basically, it's when the bullet doesn't have enough force to exit the barrel.
So it gets stuck.
Exactly. And you might not even realize it at first.
I guess that's why these handbooks really emphasize paying attention to how things sound and feel when you're shooting.
Absolutely. If the bang sounds different or the recoil feels weaker, it could be a sign of a squib load.
And if that happens, you need to stop shooting right away and check the barrel.
Don't even think about firing another shot until you've made sure that barrel is clear.
You know, these handbooks really make you think about responsibility. Like, as a shooter, you're not just responsible for hitting your target, but also for knowing where that bullet could end up if you miss.
Every shot counts.
And they actually provide some pretty eye-opening information about how far bullets can travel.
It's not something you can just shrug off. You got to be aware of your surroundings and make sure there's nothing beyond your target that you could accidentally hit.
Wow, it really is a lot to think about.
Being a responsible firearm owner is a big deal. It's not just about knowing how to shoot. It's about knowing the law, understanding your firearm, and always putting safety first.
So choosing the right ammo, storing it properly, handling malfunctions safely, it's all part of the package.
Exactly. And speaking of ammo, did you know there have been some pretty cool advancements in ammunition technology over the years?
Oh, really? Tell me more.
Well, these handbooks touch on it a bit, but they don't go into a ton of detail. Like, the powders they use these days are so much better than the old black powder.
Cleaner burning, you mean?
Yeah, and more consistent, too. That means better accuracy, faster bullet speeds, and less gunk building up inside the barrel.
Wow, so it's not just the bullets that have evolved, it's the powders, too.
And the bullet designs themselves are pretty amazing nowadays.
Like, what kind of advancements are we talking about?
Well, for hunting, for example, they have these bullets that are designed to expand on impact, creating bigger wound channels and transferring more energy to the target.
That sounds pretty intense.
It is. But it's also important because it makes for quicker, more humane kills. And then there's the whole move towards lead-free ammo, which is good for the environment.
I've heard about that. So what are they using instead of lead?
All sorts of things. Copper, bismuth, steel, they're all becoming popular alternatives.
So there's a lot of innovation happening in the world of ammo.
Absolutely. Technology never stands still, and that includes firearms and ammunition.
So to sum it all up, picking the right ammo is about way more than just grabbing whatever's on sale.
It's about matching the ammo to your firearm, your purpose, and even being mindful of the environment.
Well, we've covered a ton of ground today, but let's take a quick break and then we'll come back and wrap things up with some key takeaways and maybe a little food for thought. And we're back. You know, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the world of ammunition, from the science behind how bullets fly to those super important safety practices.
We even touched on some of the amazing advancements in ammo technology.
Right. It's a lot to take in, so let's zoom out for a sec and highlight some key takeaways for all you listeners out there.
I think for me, the most important thing, the thing that both these handbooks really hammered home, is knowing your firearm and using the correct ammunition.
It sounds so basic.
It is. But as we've seen, even the slightest difference in caliber or cartridge type can have some pretty serious consequences.
No doubt about it. And both handbooks were super clear about this. Always check that data stamp on your firearm to make absolutely sure it matches the ammunition you're using.
Absolutely. No guessing games allowed. Don't rely on memory or what the box looks like. Take the time to double check that everything lines up perfectly.
It's like a minute of double checking could save you a lifetime of regret.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Another key takeaway for me was understanding those basic principles of ballistics and trajectory. Knowing how gravity and air resistance can affect a bullet's path, it's crucial not just for hitting your target, but also for knowing where that bullet could end up if you miss.
It's about being aware of what's beyond your target and making sure every shot ends up in a safe place.
Absolutely. And safe storage is another big one. Keep that ammo locked up tight, away from kids, in a cool, dry place, just like those handbooks recommend. It's not just about being organized, it's about preventing accidents and keeping your ammo in tip-top shape.
Right. Remember that funny analogy about storing fine wine?
Yeah. Moisture is ammo's worst enemy, just like it can ruin a good bottle of Cabernet. You know, we've talked a lot about the practical side of ammunition, the what and the why, but I want to leave you with a little food for thought, something to ponder beyond the shooting range.
Ooh, I like where this is going.
We know that understanding ballistics can help you hit a target when you're shooting. But think about it. How do those same principles of ballistics and trajectory apply to other parts of life, even outside the world of firearms?
Whoa, that's deep.
It is, isn't it? Like, imagine setting goals, Think of the goal as the bullet, and the trajectory as the path you take to achieve it.
I see where you're going with this. And just like with ballistics, there are all sorts of factors that can affect your trajectory, obstacles, challenges, unexpected changes.
You have to adjust your approach along the way, just like a shooter might adjust their aim based on wind or distance. And just like the initial velocity and angle of the bullet are crucial for its path, the energy and direction you put into your goals can shape your journey.
That's such a cool way to look at it. It's amazing how these concepts can apply to so many different areas of life.
Exactly. Understanding these principles, it's about more than just firearms. It's about understanding the world around us and using that knowledge to achieve our goals and stay safe.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of ammunition. I hope you've all learned something new and maybe even gained a new appreciation for these little packages of power.
It's been a blast exploring this topic with you.
And a big thank you to all our listeners for joining us on the deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic, ready to break it down and see what hidden gems we can uncover. Until then, stay curious.